Welcome to Evergreen Reports 101. I will be providing a link to the PowerPoint in the description below. However, I'm hopeful that the video itself will probably be your main resource for either training new employees or coming back to refresh yourself on this particular subject going forward. First things first though, who is this guy? My name is Jeff Sams. I am the Library Manager for Roanoke Public Library and the Technology Officer for the North Texas Library Consortium. I've been working with Evergreen for a little over 8 years now, and I've spent a great deal of time invested in learning a lot of the ins and outs of the Evergreen ILS. I've been very lucky to attend several of the Evergreen International conferences in most recent years. And so here is what you can expect from this training session today. We will be covering a little bit of the technical details here today. How the database works, what relational tables are, what types of data you will be working with in the reporter. We'll learn a tiny bit of SQL, then we will jump into the practical application with some best practices for building reports, creating reports from scratch, modifying reports to suit your needs, and ideally, you will leave today confident in your ability to build the report you need to get the information you want consistently. So let's just jump into it. First up, we're going to take a look at how the database works, the data types you'll be working with, and how all of this influences reports you make. This is an example pulled directly from the Evergreen database. The point of this illustration is to show you how various different tables are connected together. This illustrates relational tables. On the left we have the user table, and there are various other tables that are linked by black lines. We have the card table, the user address table, the org unit, which is short for organizational unit table, and the circulation table. Each table is linked together into various relations by various IDs. The card table stores library card barcodes and whether those cards are currently active. They connect to the user table by the user table's ID field, which matches the card table's user field. Evergreen had all of the previous information split up into a variety of different tables. For instance, instead of storing a whole address in the mailing address field of the user table, the information is split out into its own table, and the unique ID for that address entry is referenced in the user table. This visualization method is an excellent way to help understand how the tables are all interconnected. What you see here are 5 different tables from 2 different areas, or schema, of the database. There are a few hundred tables spread out across some 28 different schema sections. So it's a fairly large cluster of tables, all referencing each other throughout the entire database. This list contains all of the data types we will be working with when building reports. These will show up later on when we go to build a report. It's important to know what type of information you are working with so you can work with it accordingly. Text is just general text. Any type of character can be present in a text field. ID is a unique identification number that can't be repeated in a specific table. Money is pretty straightforward, dollars and cents. Timestamps include both the date and time with the time zone information. Boolean fields are true or false. Intervals hold relative time frames. Most of the intervals are for checkout links, such as the ones here, 14 days and 7 hours. Org unit is a special ID. It has some special coding built in that allows it to work a little differently than normal IDs. We will be getting into that a bit more later. Int is for integer, which is simply a number. Links are special, and they indicate that there is a link to another table present. We will learn more about links a little bit later on when we're actually building a report. Now that we have a handle on a bit of how databases work and what kinds of data types we can expect to see, it's time to talk about best practices. Creating reports can be very straightforward and take maybe one try. It isn't likely, but I've done it myself, so I know it can be done. It is much more likely that it will take a few tries to work through a particular reporting problem. Because of this, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to come back later and pick up where you left off. We also want your neighbor to know how you built the report so they could do it too if they so chose. You want to start off on the right foot, or you'll have a mess on your hands and no good way to clean it up. It's important to pick a strong starting point for building a report from. How you do that is ultimately up to you, but I can highly recommend this simple process for keeping on task. Write up a quick 1 or 2 sentences describing the end result you are hoping for. Some simple examples are here on the screen. It's important to keep things clear and concise. You want to stay on task and avoid unnecessary complexity and overreaching your initial needs. You can experiment with further complexity later on in either a new report or by starting from a finished product. So the items that we have here on the screen go through a number of different scenarios that you may find that you would really ideally want to use. These are all actually examples that I have pulled from my own reports. The report should show me a count of circulations last month in each shelving location. Is very straightforward, very simple, very little complexity. My next option here though, the report should show a count of circulations broken down by month and year in each shelving location, ideally displayable as a pivot table, is certainly quite a bit more complex than the previous statement. And so you can kind of see how easy it is to add levels of complexity one on top of the other. And so it can be, even in this form, very easy to make this get out of hand. Trying to keep things simple when you're starting off and working from there is a great way to keep everything under control and keep you focused on the task at hand. It's important to keep things straight while you build and test your reports. The more difficult the report is to create, the more you need to keep track of your changes and avoid confusion later down the line. This is pretty straightforward stuff. Put a version number on your report. Change it every time you edit the report. This is going to be for your benefit. Just pick a versioning option that works for you. I tend to stick to test builds being version 0 and improvements going 1.0 on up. Avoid naming reports without any version or relying on the added clone tag, which will get really excessive really quickly. As you can see here, I've given a couple of examples of some do's and don'ts. These follow a lot of the different things that I will use in my own tests. If it's something that I have released a final version of, it gets a version 1.0 moniker, and any improvements that I make to that report going forward are just simple point upgrades. If it's something I am not finished with, I am still trying to figure out how to get exactly what I was looking for in that initial statement, it's going to be a version 0. In this case, collection cost report version 0.6. And sometimes I might just be testing out a variety of different ideas just to see what can and can't be done. So sometimes I'll just make it a test 1, test 2, test 3 sort of scenario. There's no cut and dry way to do this, but versioning your reports will definitely help keep things clear for you going forward. Don't just give your report a name that's really just kind of barely there. No versions. You'll have clone, 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 clone at the end of the report. It will get infuriatingly awful the more reports you have to create. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive in and build ourselves a report. So I am going to switch over to Evergreen here, and we are going to jump into our reports interface. So in case this is your first time, right now I am working from what is considered the old staff client. At the time of this recording, we are still about a month out from upgrading to the Evergreen 3.0 system, and with that will come a reports interface change. So some of the concepts that you see here will not directly translate then. However, I do plan on making specific reports training videos in that engine after we go live. So look out for those in the future. Those will be coming out February onward. So from the home screen, there are two different ways to get to the reports. I'm going to use the easiest one, which is here on the home screen. So we're going to click on reports, bring ourselves into this, and here you will have the basic setup. Now from here, if you've never built a report at all, then you're not going to see exactly what I see. Right now we have this My Folders section, and we have a Shared Folders section. Now, if you've never built any reports and never even touched this interface before a day in your life, this My Folders section, instead of showing these little yellow folder icons, you will see little white blank page icons. And that basically just means you don't have a place to actually store anything yet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cover creating those folders first. Now, since I have folders, I'm going to really quickly click on this little arrow icon just to the left of the folder icon to drill down and show you what I have. Now I've got a 101 Training, 101 Training 2, and 101 Work in Progress folder in my templates folder. And if I do the same thing for the one for reports and the one for output, you're going to notice that I have the exact same folders in each of these. That is by design. The idea here is that when you create a template and you run that template as a report and you generate output, that all of that information sticks to the same folder in each subsection. So you know I ran this report output from this template folder. It's an easy trace back. It's more for you than anything else. I highly recommend creating a template, reports, and output folder that match for every folder that you want to create. With that said, let's create one so that we have that process on lock. So, first things first, you're going to want to click on the actual templates header, not the folder and not the arrow, the actual link that says templates. And that's going to bring up this little prompt that says create a new subfolder, folder type template. You're going to have 3 different boxes to fill in. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new 101 Training folder. I'm going to use 101 Training 3 because I've already got 2 other 101 Training folders. And this is just to illustrate how this works. Now the next 2 options are whether or not you want to share this folder and who you want to share it with, if you've shared it. The default is do not share, which makes this third option completely unnecessary for the purposes of your report. If you do not share, you do not have to change who you share it with. If you change it to share, you do want to update who you're sharing it with. Now your options are fairly minimal. It's either going to be your library, your geographic area, or the entire consortium. Those are the only options you'll have for sharing. However, if you do a lot of interdepartment reporting, sharing with your own library is a great way to be able to share that information back and forth. And you don't have to share everything that you generate. If all you're doing is learning reports for your own sake, use do not share. There's no reason for you to have to put any of that out there unless you need somebody to help you troubleshoot a report. I highly recommend having somebody who is knowledgeable in reports within your library that you can use to help troubleshoot issues with reporting. If you don't have that, however, I highly recommend either contacting me at my library. You'll see my information later on in this particular session, or you can also contact Jordan at the Aubrey area library. He is an excellent reporter, and he will more than likely be able to help you resolve any problems that you have. So we're not going to share this folder, and we're just going to create that. We're just going to create our subfolder, action succeeded. And we come back to this, we click the little arrow, and there it is, 101 Training 3. Now that we've done that one, we also need to create a reports folder and an output folder that are also 101 Training 3. So we're going to click on the link that says reports. It's going to actually have this automatically filled in our case. So all we really have to do is just hit create subfolder, and it's going to automatically take care of that for us. And then once more, we're going to check the arrows, 101 Training 3, 101 Training 3, and we're going to create our output. Again, 101 Training 3, create subfolder, all done. And now we can check them once more. All of them are exactly the same. And so there you have, everything is set up and ready to work. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is my reports 101 Training 1, essentially, is shared with the entire consortium. That's what this little, in parentheses, NTLC stands for. It means that it is shared, and it is shared with the entire consortium. So you can go down here to the shared folder section and click on the arrow next to templates and find Reports Jeff down here. It won't show up on my screen because I am Reports Jeff, and your own user account does not show up in the shared folders. But Reports Jeff will show up down here, and you will be able to click on that, and you'll be able to see 101 Training NTLC and 101 WIP NTLC. And you'll see that for the templates, the reports, and the outputs, because I've shared all of that. And this is a training resource. The whole purpose is to give you access to that information. Now, with that said, we are going to go ahead and jump into actually creating a template. So, first things first, if I click on 101 Training, you're going to see that there are already a number of reports here. And that's by design. I have copied these reports from my own folders, Roanoke Jeff, or from elsewhere, into this particular folder so that we had some examples to work from right off the bat. The idea here is that this gives you a chance to kind of look at some different ideas for later. Some of these are examples of good reports building. Some of them are simply just there to play with, in a sense. So before we look at any of that stuff too in depth, I do want to show off one very important detail from one of these reports just very quickly. So if I click this checkbox next to circulation by shelving location for pivot table version 1.8, and I choose this drop-down box and choose clone selected template, what this is going to do is prompt me to duplicate this template into another folder and then edit that. And I only want to do this so that I can illustrate something, so you do not need to follow along with me for this part unless you just want to get a closer look at it yourself. So we click submit. Now it's going to ask us to choose a folder. I'm going to choose one of the new folders just because I created it, might as well as utilize it for a little bit here. And then I will click select folder. Now this is the reporter interface, and I understand if your first thought upon looking at this is that that is a lot to take in. It is certainly a lot to take in, but I am going to ask you to focus on one particular area, and that is actually this small box right here that says description. We're going to be going over a quick best practices for creating reports. Now, you'll notice that the description has one line of text in it. It's a very small box. It's unfortunate that in this particular version of Evergreen, this box has always been a very small, non-resizable box, because it has a lot of information in it. In the new staff client, this box is actually resizable, and you'll actually be able to see quite a bit more of it, and it's better for it. In any case, you'll notice that the first information in the description probably doesn't make any sense to anyone who would be looking at this unless they are into a little bit more advanced reports. And that says nullability enabled report, nullable type in parentheses. Now, in this particular case, this report is using an advanced feature called enable nullability selection. Now, we're not going to be getting into this today, and for a very good reason, but for this particular type of reporting, it is really a good idea to make sure that it is apparent that that is enabled in your report as soon as possible. It will make it much easier to edit in the future. The reason for this is that in this report interface, when you go to edit any report, this checkbox is not checked, and if you go to edit a nullable enabled report without this checkbox checked, you're gonna run into some issues. So it's one of the first things you'll need to do is click that checkbox just for your own sake. With that said, we're going to move on to the more important part of this description. There's actually more than one line here. If you read the description in the previous panel, you'll know that there's quite a bit more text here than first meets the eye. So clicking into this box and going down, we will start to see some more information. Displayed fields, and then how we got these fields in place. This format shows the path that we took to get to a particular field, what data type that field is, and how we transform that field for use in our report. And you'll notice that this one right here, item circulations, checkout date and time, timestamp, year plus month, is the first item in our display here. If we continue down, we will find one of the next items, in this case circ ID. We also have shelving location. If we continue down, we will also see our base filters and how we got those. And our base filters have some extra special options, which are operators, and I've also included that information in the description as well. Now, this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about making your report in such a way that it is easy for anyone to pick up. They'll be able to look at your description and see exactly what you did to build your report. And you'll be able to come back to your report later and say, oh, okay, so that's how I did that. It's extremely important. If you can do this, I highly recommend doing this for every report that you create, because it just makes your life easier along the way. Now, if in this case, this report does not use any aggregate filters, but I do make a note that it does not. And then at the bottom, I actually create a real description that actually in English describes what this report is, what it does, and what you can expect, how it filters, various different information that you might be interested in learning. If you are in an extra level above this, you may have yet another section that basically describes all of the changes that you have made to this report as time has gone on. That might be a little bit much, because if you have been keeping your old versioned reports, you pretty much have a shot-for-shot timeline of every change you've ever made, because you've been changing the information that's shown in the displayed fields description and the base filters description and the aggregate filters description along the way. So with that said, we've kind of covered a lot of the basics. We're going to go and build a quick report. So I'm going to click go back. I'm going to click the arrow next to templates. I'm going to click on 101 work in progress. And instead of choosing one of these work in progress reports that I have created previously, we are going to create a new template for this folder. It is a link off to the side right here. Right, click on that. And we're going to come back into the screen, but it's going to be completely blank. There's no source selected, there's no information displayed, no description, nothing. Now, earlier I had talked about how you should have a clear idea of what it is that you want from your report. The best way to do this is to write out a 1 or 2 sentence description of what it is that you're wanting to do. Now, you can do this here, or you can do it in a text editor. In my case, I'm going to be doing it in a text editor, because the text editor is going to be your friend for the foreseeable future for this process. The beautiful thing about Evergreen is that you can write stuff in Notepad and copy it and paste it directly into Evergreen. So, with that said, we're going to write a brief description of the report that I'm about to create for you. Feel free to follow along with this process so you can kind of see how things turn out. So, what we are going to do is we are going to create a simple report that reports on the number of circulations that have happened in our library over the past month, or specifically last month. So we want to report that just gives us a flat number of circulations for our library for last month. Nothing special about this report at all. It is very cut and dry. All we're looking for is for it to tell us this many circulations happened in this particular month at our library. Done, done, and done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to real quickly copy and paste this in the description to just kind of keep it there and relevant. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this Reports 101 Circulation Training version 0.1. So this is our first iteration. We're going to give this a go. So one of the things that's important about writing that description is that it will tell us, almost certainly tell us, what table, what source we need to use to generate our report. So, as you can see, the report creation layout is pretty straightforward, if a little bit much to take in at first glance. We have 3 panes up here at the top. The first pane is the database source browser. It has a drop-down menu for the various different sources, and there are quite a few sources. Each of these sources specifically references a table in the Evergreen database, and if this first pane wasn't enough, there is another one after you hit this, and this one contains all of the available sources, every single one. You can scroll for a long time on this list. As I said earlier, there are hundreds of tables in over 20 schema across the entire database. But luckily, we don't need any of that. These core sources are going to be the most used sources that you will ever need. You shouldn't really ever have to dive into these extra available sources. With that said, there are going to be circumstances where you may need some niche piece of item of data that diving into those will be relevant, but in our case we're going to be making a very simple circulation report. So best particular source for that obviously is going to be circulation. That's the information we're wanting to get at the core of it. So we're going to click on circulation, and you're going to see it fills in circulation right here in this box. Now if we click on circulation, you will see that this second pane over here now fills in with information. And one of the pieces of information that you're going to see here is that it gives us a bunch of different data types. These data types are exactly what I was talking about earlier on in the session. Everything that we talked about there, you will see over here. These links are essentially a direct line to another table. This circulation table connects to archived copy statcat entries in some way, somehow. Luckily, we aren't going to have to delve into much of any linking too heavily in this particular report. If we click on a non-link option, then we will see the right-hand pane fill in with different field transforms. And these are generally pretty self-explanatory. I clicked on billing totals, which is a money data type. And so all of the field transforms are going to be based off of that data type. You can get a sum of money. You can get a minimum and a maximum, a first value, last value, a count of the different amounts, an average of all of the amounts in a particular table, various things like that. If I were to click on timestamp, we would get a completely different set of options that are specific to timestamps. Day, name, year plus month, date, just regular date, and date's going to be one that you'll probably use a lot, to be completely honest. I'm particularly fond of year plus month as well. I use it in most of my circulation reports, but it's not part of this particular report we're working on right now. So with all of that said, I think we have just enough tools to kind of get this first report going. So now we have a number of different tabs down here that we're going to be filling in with various things here. So first things first, we're going to try and figure out our display fields. Now we know what information we want. We want a report that gives a flat number of circulations for our library, specifically for last month. So it would probably be helpful for us to be able to get a count of circulations, a reference that tells us our library, and preferably something that gives us at least the month. I am fond of having the month and year, just if I need to go back and reference it later. So first things first, we kind of want to get an idea for the number of circulations. Now you're essentially talking about a count, and there's no hard item in here that counts specifically all of the circulations for your library without cross-referencing a number of other things. In this particular case, what we're actually wanting to do is lean on something that is distinct in a table. It doesn't repeat ever. In this particular case, we're talking about an ID. Now, this is how we're going to get an accurate count of how many circulations happened, because for every circulation ID in the circulation table, a transaction has occurred. So if we count the circulation IDs, which are already distinct, so we don't even actually have to use count distinct, but we're going to anyway because I'm going to be a bit of a stickler on this one. Count distinct is what we're interested in. We want each distinct transaction, and even though circ ID is distinct on every row of the table, it's still just a thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on count distinct while we have the display fields tab selected. So we double click on this, and you will see circ ID pop up in this table down below. So we have data type ID, we have field transform count distinct. Now what this essentially does is it's telling us that it's going to display this field in our report when we finish. We've got that much going for us. We're already one step in the door. At this point, we just need to make sure that our library somehow is represented in the display fields, and the date is represented in one of those fields. So the next thing we're going to do is, while we have circulation selected, we're going to find the circulating library. And we're going to notice that the data type for this is org unit. Now, if you remember from earlier in the video, org unit is a special ID. It has some special properties that we are going to lean on here in a little bit, but for now, this particular instance is not useful for us because we would really kind of like to be able to read the name of our library in the display field of our report. So, for this case, org unit also acts particularly like a link to another table. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to drill down a little bit in our first pane over here. Next to circulation, right here, there is a little arrow that lights up a little blue whenever you're hovering over circulation. If you click on that arrow, it will create a drop-down menu. And you will see that every entry in this table that has link shows up in this little drill down right here. And in some cases, you will notice that there are other types that show up here as well. But specifically, when it comes to links, you will notice that those always pop up here. Org units are exactly the same. If an org unit is here, then you are going to find it in this section. And that's a good thing. We want circulating library, but we don't want the ID information. We would really like a plain English name to display in our display fields. So if we click on circulating library in the first pane, we will get a new set of information in this second pane. One of the items in that is name, which we can see is general text. Strong possibility that general text is going to be English human readable text. So in this particular case, we're not going to use any of these special field transforms. We're actually just going to double click on name. And you're going to see that name pops up in the display fields, data type text, field transform, raw data. And that's by design. We want just the raw text. We don't want to transform that in any way, shape, or form. We just want it to show up how it is in the system. And so there we have it. Now, one of the things that can happen as you're building a report with the display fields in particular is that you don't necessarily know what they are. A lot of things in this reports builder will show up with display names that are name or ID or something to that nature. Due date, checkout date, things like that don't necessarily give you exactly what you're looking for in the display fields. I know that name as a text field is referenced in org unit table, the shelving location table. I believe it's also in the item status table. The name is used, and so when you enter them in here, you could end up with 3 different fields that just have a display name that is name. And that's not particularly useful if you're really trying to kind of get back and forth. So when you enter something that's into this section that is very generic, like name, you can click on this button down here that says Alter Display Header. And what that'll do is it will pop up a box that will allow you to change what is displayed there. In this particular case, we're going to be changing this to circulating library, because that's more descriptive. That is what we are looking for from this data. And while we're at it, circ ID isn't actually what we're looking for here. What we're actually getting, what we're actually going to see at the end of this is circulations. So we'll call it that. Now, we've got our count of circulations, we've got our circulating library. The only thing we need now is some form of date to reference in our reports display. So if we come back to our first pane and click on circulation once more, we're going to have our first little conundrum. Now, I have had 2 of these classes in person. This is the first time that I am recording any of these. One of the questions that I pose to the class is, how do you or your library or institution count what a circulation is? In this particular case, at my library, we count circulations as of the time an item is checked out. Now, I pose this question because some libraries, I know that there are some libraries out there that only count the circulation when the item returns or by the check-in date. However you do it, I'm not judging one way or the other. However you do it, you need to stay consistent when building reports. If you create one circulation report that uses checkout date and time, and another report that uses check-in date and time, you will get 2 completely different numbers for the same period of time, because those 2 numbers are going to almost always be different. And if they are the same, it is by a crazy coincidence more than anything else. And so that's something you really have to take into consideration. For my sake, like I said, my library uses checkout date and time. To me, an item circulates the moment it is given to someone. And so checkout date and time. That's the case. You'll have to pardon me if you hear a quick break of me taking a drink. It is difficult to stay hydrated during these longer sessions, and I've been at this for about 40 minutes now. So with that said, we're going to use checkout date and time. And in this particular case, I'm interested in the number of circulations last month. And as I referenced earlier, my favorite field transform for a timestamp is year plus month, because that will give us a month and a year to reference in the future. Whereas if you just chose month, then you may lose track of that information, and it won't be as relevant a few months later, because it could be from last year, it could be from this year, it could be from next year. You won't know. So I'm going to double click on year plus month, and that's going to pop it into our display fields. So now we have all of this information. I'm going to tidy things up just a little bit, because how you have things organized in your displayed fields here is how they will show up, or what order they will show up in your report output later on. I like to have circulations as essentially the last piece of information that you're getting. Everything else is a reference to the data that you're actually after. I kind of like to have that left to right setup, where the information on the right hand side is really the data you're looking for. So I'm going to move circulations all the way down, and that's actually all that I'm going to do, because I like to know the circulating library first, then the date that is referenced in the report, and then the numbers that I'm actually looking for. Now from there, if we were to save this report and run it, you're going to get a lot of information. Matter of fact, you're going to get information about the count of circulations for every library for every month that the consortium has existed. And so that goes all the way back to September of 2009. You're talking about 8 years, 8 years and 3 months of data. And that's one, going to take a little bit of time to run. And two, not actually what we were looking for. That's not what this suggests. This suggests that we're going to be wanting the circulations for our library only for last month. At the time of this recording, what we're looking for is, in my report, I'm looking for the flat number of circulations for Roanoke for the month of November. So, 2017. So, with that said, we need to add some filters. And so we are going to go ahead and get started on that. Now, one of the things that I have not really referenced here at this time is that, and I don't believe I've done it in any of my previous trainings, and so I apologize for this because it's actually a fairly important sticking point. When you use something for a display field that is also going to be used as a filter, it definitely needs to be the exact same thing. If you pick like a checkout date and time from one place and a checkout date and time from a different reference in the database, it's actually going to create some awkward differences that are not really reconcilable. I can't really explain exactly why that is, other than that's kind of how SQL works. You kind of create a web from this information that you're putting into the reporter, and based off of the information in that web is how it grabs the data and then puts it into the report for you to see. So we are going to be using checkout date and time. We are going to be using circulating library. And so we want to pick the exact same ones that we picked earlier. Luckily, the source specifier box over here to the right hand side actually helps us do exactly that. Also luckily, this report is extremely simple. It is not difficult to find what we've already used and where we got it from. So with that in mind, we want the circulating library, but in this particular instance, what we got for circulating library for the display fields was the name, which is a text field. In this particular case, we actually want to use that org unit. And so first, we're going to click on the tab for base filters, because that's where we're going to be working for the most part moving forward here. So for our cases, we want to start with circulation here in this first section, because both of the things that we really need to use are going to be here. In this case, our checkout date and time as a timestamp. In this particular case, what we are going to want to do is pick the same year plus month, and we're going to take that and pop it into our base filters. So double click on year plus month, boom, there you have it. Now in this particular case, there are a couple different ways to do this, and I'm actually going to change the transform here in just a moment, because there is what I consider to be a better way to do this in general, because it is straightforward, because it is really kind of the best way to do it. So for this particular case, we're actually going to change the transform right quick to date, and the reason for that is the operator, which we're going to change as well. We don't want the date to equal a particular date, because if we do that, the information it's going to return to us is going to be for that specific date and time. What we want is to change the operator to between. Now what between will do with the date transform in particular is it will present us with two separate fields to fill in when we create the report, and it will give us, more importantly, a calendar widget from which to choose those dates from. And that is really quite the boon for us. You'll see that in a little bit. In any case, that's how we're going to start with that. The next thing we want is the circulating library as an org unit. In this particular case, all we're going to do is just double click on circulating library, because there is only one field transform. It is raw data. So we have that. In this particular case, it gives us equals. Now equals is alright if you know exactly what your library's organizational unit ID is, but most of you won't. I'll show you, I can show you a way to get that information, but ideally you want your report to be easily worked when you get to the part where you're generating those reports. And so what we're actually going to do is change the operator for this one to enlist. Here is where organizational unit as a special ID comes into play. By picking an organizational unit as a base filter and picking enlist, or even not enlist, that one will work as well, but picking enlist, for this particular one, we will actually get a list with human readable names in it that we can just select our library from. Normally with an ID, all you're going to do is get a list of numbers, or you're going to get an input box where you have to enter them in manually, and that is just not ideal at all. And so we'll see more of that here in just a little bit. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that that can't be it. I mean, surely that can't be it. Just one filter to tell us which library we're looking at, and one filter to tell us which month to look at, and it's just going to give us all this information. That's it. This is it. We've finished the report. Ideally, we haven't run it, so we don't know if it works yet. But there is one more step that we probably ought to take, and so this is going back to best practices. We want to build our report information. Now, we already did kind of a rough description, which is that it's a report that gives this information, but we haven't done the display fields, and we haven't done the base filters, and we haven't done the aggregate filters. Thankfully, that one's real simple. There are no aggregate filters, so we're done there. But there are 3 display fields and 2 base filters for us to fill in. So first things first, we're going to go through and we're going to detail where we got all of these items from. Now, in this case, we have circulating library, but we got the name, and so where we got this from, and this is one of those things that you can do as you're kind of going through things. As you're adding these display fields in, you can go ahead and have this text editor off to the side, and you're just adding this information in as you go. The idea is that you're just going to copy and paste this information from here into the description box and be done, and be good to go. And so our circulating library display name is going to be circulation, and then I'm going to use a little arrow. Some people will use colons to kind of get that going through, maybe semicolons, however you want to do it. I kind of like to show that action of drilling forward. It's not circulation table, it's the next one. And so in this case it's circulation, and then we're going to be circulating library. And I usually go ahead and use the arrow for the actual field itself as well. In this case it is name. And now here's where you can do a couple of different things. I like to detail what data type it is and what transform I used. It's a personal preference, you don't have to do this, but it does make things easier in the long run for somebody who's looking at your information after the fact. So we have that one. We have checkout date and time is actually very straightforward because it is just on the top level. It is a timestamp, and its transform is year plus month. And finally we have circulations, which is the circulation table circ ID. In this case it is an ID data type, and we use count distinct. That covers our display fields, so now we have our base filters. So we come back to the base filters, we reopen our notepad, bring it back to the front, and we have checkout data time and circulating library. So base filters are pretty straightforward. Circulation once more, checkout date time. In this case we are using the date transform, and this is where things are a little bit different. I don't use the type, the data type and the field transform. I just put in the field transform and the operator. So we're only referencing the data that's easily visible. If we enter a value that is preset, as you will notice Down here there is an extra column that we didn't do anything with this time. If we enter a value into this, it hard codes that particular filter to that value, so you don't have to enter it every time you try to run that report. If we put a value in here, I would reference it in our description so that it's easily seen and nobody gets confused about how the report works. But in this case we didn't, so I'm not going to reference anything here. And finally, we also used just the circulation table to get the circulating library, which is raw data and in list. And that's it. That's all we have to do. We're done with this. You may want to come back and redo the description, but for our cases, I'm just going to take this as is. So I'm going to copy it, come over here, highlight what I already had in the box, Control V, paste it in there, and you're done. At this point, we've got our report finished. We click the Save button. It's going to give us the report name. It's going to give us the description for the report, and this is everything that we typed in. And then it's going to ask us if we want to save that template. Okay, I'm down for that. Template Reports 101 Circulation Training version 0.1 was successfully saved. Okay, fantastic. And then it's going to kick us back here. Now, from here, we're going to drill down. We're going to click the little arrow next to Templates. And then we are going to click on 101 Work in Progress. If you'll remember earlier, this is the folder I clicked on before we started working on that template. And you're going to see that Reports 101 Circulation Training version 0.1 is here with all of the information that we had. So it's ready to go. Now we want to run the report. So we're going to click the checkbox next to that report. We're not going to change this drop-down box because it says create a new report from the selected template. That's exactly what we want to do. So we're going to click on Submit. And now we're going to have a new interface to look through. And this is where we're going to find out whether or not we did things correctly. If everything I have said so far is true, then ideally the report will have all of the expected outcomes and it will give us exactly what we're looking for. So first things first, we're going to need a report name. So this is Reports 101 Circ Training. I like to go ahead and put a number at the end of these because sometimes I will run multiple iterations of this. Sometimes I'll use the same version number for the report that I'm running. In this case, I'm just going to put a 1 at the end and call it done. If you need a description for your output, put that in here. I highly recommend using the description if you plan on sending this report to someone, the report output specifically, to someone else. Because when they when they get the email for that, it will, when they click on the link, it will include the report description in the web page that opens up. And so I'm going to type in a little test message so you can see what that would look like whenever we do this in a minute. But this is where the report description goes. So now on the next part we see a section that says selected folder. Now you'll notice this says report folders. So over here it's reports, over here it's report folders. It's unfortunate that they didn't get that right between the two, but that's what it is. We're running this from the 101 work in progress, so we're going to put it in the 101 work in progress reports folder as its running location. And now we get to the filters, and this is where I can tell you we did things correctly. Now, in both of the classes, I purposefully did something wrong so that I could illustrate troubleshooting a report. For the purposes of this video, I'm not doing that. I'm actually going to create a separate video specifically for troubleshooting report errors. And we will get to that in a future video. And I promise I'm going to be trying to make that a little bit more robust than what we have here. So, with that said, we have a circulation checkout date and time, and it's between two dates. Now you can do two different things here. You can actually choose real date or relative date, and relative date is a number of days ago. In this particular case, we're not going to be using that for this. We're actually going to use real dates. And like I said, it gives you a calendar widget, which is this little calendar button here. If you click on, it will open an actual calendar. And so you can just go back a month. And we want it for last month. So I'm going to click November 1st for this first section. I'm going to come down to the second one. I'm going to go back a month and choose November 30th for the second text box. Now if you know the date format for how Evergreen formats dates, then you can just utilize that and you're good to go. But if you don't, using the calendar widget is, honestly, it's the best crutch you can ever lean on, and I highly recommend doing so. Now, as I said before, using a org unit with enlist gives you this handy little setup that will give you actual human readable names to utilize for creating your filter. So in this case, everything shows up exactly as we would want it. In this particular case, it actually auto highlights your home library for the user that you're logged in as, and so at least I think that's how it's based. It could also be based off of your workstation location, but I'm not going to muddle into any of that at the moment. For this case, I want Roanoke, so I'm just going to click Add, and it's going to pop Roanoke into this box down here. If you make a mistake, you can highlight it and click Delete, and it will remove it from the box like so. But we really do want Roanoke, so we're just going to pop it there. Now we have our output options here. Realistically, if you don't need an HTML output with bar charts, then deselect those because they just take up unnecessary space on the server. More often than not, you're going to want Excel output, so select Excel output only and call it done. If you use a different system that can't open Excel, then you're going to want to use the CSV output more than likely, because chances are whatever other program you're using for spreadsheets will be able to open that output. Pretty much every output generating, any spreadsheet program will be able to open up Excel output at this point, but in case you need it, CSV is your go-to for that. You can choose whether or not this is a recurring report. Now, this is a bad report to make a recurring report, because if we do select this box and do tell it to recur in whatever time frame, it's going to rerun the same report with these same dates, and that's not ideal. That's where you would use relative dates, running a report that gives you information from the last 30 days to the last 1 day, or something of that nature. That's the kind of situation you'd want that in. But you can tell it to recur. You can tell it to recur a number of days, a number of weeks, or a number of months. Quite a few, in fact. So it can recur at just about any feasible interval you can think of. If you do create a recurring report, then that's when you might want to use something other than run as soon as possible, which is picking a date and time for your report to run, because whatever time your first report runs at is what the recurrence will always run at in the future. So if you run a report at 2:22 on the 22nd or what have you, that's the time it's going to run on the 23rd if you make the interval 1 day. The 24th and the 25th, it's going to run at 2:22 each of those days. So you may want to set it up to run at 5 a.m. On the first day of a month, so that you're getting those statistics as soon as possible. Heck, midnight of the first of the month, so that you're actually getting them as soon as possible. And finally, we have the output folders. Again, it's mixed language output folders here and output up here. That's unfortunate, but what are you going to do? Once again, we did work in progress for all of this, so 101 work in progress here as well, and then we're done. We're going to save the report. If everything went well, you'll get this nice pop-up that says action succeeded, and we're going to click OK. And now we're brought back to the work in progress folder. where we don't actually want to be anymore. So we're actually going to click the arrow next to our output over here, and we're going to come down to our 101 work in progress in the output section. Now, if the report setup wasn't so incredibly fast and the report wasn't so incredibly easy, we might have seen Reports 101 Circ Training 1 actually be up in this other section that's for pending items. However, I was not fast enough, and the report system is incredibly fast to run it in less than a minute's time. So it's right here, it's ready to go. We can go ahead and look at it. Before I do that, there is a little known feature in the reports interface that I wanted to highlight really quick. If you click on the link of the report name, it's going to give you some extra information. The name of the report, that's exactly what you've got here, is the name of the report. The description that you typed in when you were creating the report to run, which template it used, what time it was created, whether or not it recurs, what its recurrence interval is, the ID for the owner, which isn't particularly useful. It can be used in a couple of places, but it's not particularly useful for just everyday users. And then there's an edit section here. Now this is the reason why I wanted to show this off. You can view what settings you use to run this report, but you can also edit what settings you use to run this report. So if you ran a report and for whatever reason you can't find exactly where that report is, but you know it still exists, you can come back here, you can find this report output, you can drill down to this, and you can come to this edit button. If you click on edit, it's going to bring up this same reports generating interface, and you can make a few changes. Maybe change this to 2, and maybe you want to change the dates. So maybe you want to get fiscal year so far, so you do that. You don't really need to change anything else, so you're all done. But now you've got an extra button down here that allows you to save it as new. So you can actually generate a completely new report from old output based off of everything that you ran the first time. Now, this is a great way to generate consistent information every time. You can just come to the output. If you forgot to set up a recurring report and you want to just catch up on stuff, you can go here and do this. So I'm going to click Save as New because I edited enough information. The action succeeded, so we're okay there. We're going to come back to the output here, and it's already done. We're already up and running. Alright, so now we're going to view the output. You click the checkbox next to the output you want to look at. In this case, Reports 101 Circ Training 1. We don't need to change this drop-down box. We want to view the report output. We click Submit. And now you can see this is the web page that would pop up for somebody if they got the report via email. Now, to get here, you need an Evergreen user. You can't just, send somebody a link to this page using the editor. It has to be done this way. But here's that description I was talking about. And now there are 2 links here. One is very difficult to see, but it says Debugging Info here on the right-hand side. If you're having a particular amount of trouble building kind of a complex report, you can click on this Debugging Info, which I'm going to do here, and it's going to give you a bunch of different information. The generated SQL, here's that little bit of SQL I was talking about. If you have a report that you're having trouble with and you think that there's something going on there that you can that somebody else can fix, if you're sending it to me in particular, you can also click on this debugging output, send me the generated SQL, and I'll be able to take a pretty good look at it from the inside of things to kind of see how the report is trying to work. If I also have your template, then I can also kind of see what it was that you were trying to do. And so I can kind of see it from both angles with that information. This other information is less useful. It's still useful, but it's more complex than allows for really anything useful, in my opinion. It would take more time to go through this information than it would just to use the shared template in the reports builder. So from that, we're going to go back using the back button up here in the top left. And we're going to click on Excel output. And you're going to see a familiar interface here, and we're going to go ahead and open it with Microsoft Excel. And there we have it. Now the report is here. I'm going to just real quickly take care of that so we get out of the way. And you can see we have circulating library, Roanoke Public Library. This is exactly what I want. The checkout date and time, 2017-11, November 2017, great. And the number of circulations, 8,012. And that lines up, is to the best of my knowledge, with the same information that I have been pulling myself. So it did exactly what we wanted it to do. So as you can see, we've got everything done here. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. I'm not going to save it for the purposes of this. I'm going to close out of this particular window. We're done. So let's bring up the PowerPoint real quick one more time and finish this out. If you've got any questions, comments, appraisals of this video, please do not hesitate to get in contact with me. My email address is there on the screen, gsams@roanoketexas.com. I look forward to hearing from any and all of you about ways that I can improve this in the future. And of course, if I do improve this in the future, I will be sure to set up some sort of link here on the screen, ideally, with an end card, with a link to any videos that might be relevant to that nature. I'll have a link in here as well for probably the next video in the series, whatever that might be. Yeah, I hope that everybody gets something really good out of this, and I hope that it really helps you make good reports in the future. With that said, I appreciate you taking the time to sit through this video, to take this journey with me, and I hope that ultimately it does you and your library a great deal of good. Take care.